At 3:41 a.m., the commercial tanker MV Starlight Monarch, a 330-meter VLCC carrying 280,000 metric tons of Saudi crude bound for Rotterdam, stopped responding to its AIS transponder. The vessel had been transiting the Strait of Hormuz's eastbound traffic separation lane, 6.2 nautical miles north of the Omani coastline, when its bridge communications went silent. The Maritime Rescue Coordination Center in Muscat logged the transponder loss at 3:42 a.m. and attempted radio contact on Channel 16. No response. At 3:44 a.m., a distress signal transmitted on 406 MHz from the vessel's EPIRB for 11 seconds, then stopped. An EPIRB that transmits for 11 seconds and goes silent has not activated accidentally. It has been manually suppressed. At 3:44 a.m., the P-8A Poseidon on its standard Hormuz surveillance orbit acquired the MV Starlight Monarch on FLIR. The thermal return showed 9 small, fast-moving heat signatures approaching the tanker from its port quarter at high speed. The P-8A's operator had the profile on his screen for 4 seconds before he recognized it. Hudong-class speedboats, 6 with RHIB configuration, and 3 with the distinctive twin-engine signature of IRGCN Blade Runner 51 fast attack craft. He transmitted at 3:44 a.m. 9 small craft, IRGCN profile, alongside MV Starlight Monarch, vessel communications lost, EPIRB suppressed, crew believed to be under duress. The operator had been on this orbit for 3 hours. He had cataloged 847 vessel movements in the Strait over the preceding 4 weeks of his deployment, building the baseline behavioral pattern against which any anomaly would register. He had flagged the initial small craft movement at 3:39 a.m., 5 minutes before the seizure, as statistically unusual for the time and position. He had increased FLIR resolution on the approach vector at 3:41 a.m. When the MV Starlight Monarch's AIS transponder dropped at 3:42 a.m., he was already watching the 9 fast-moving thermal returns close on the tanker's port quarter. His transmission at 3:44 a.m. was not a reaction to a surprising event. It was the documented conclusion of a 5-minute observation that had begun with a behavioral anomaly he had been trained to notice. 2 nautical miles ahead of the Starlight Monarch, the MV Caspian Venture, a 275-meter LNG carrier carrying 140,000 cubic meters of Qatari liquefied natural gas, had also stopped responding. Its AIS transponder had ceased broadcasting at 3:43 a.m. At 3:46 a.m., a second P-8A on the western Hormuz orbit acquired 4 small craft alongside the Caspian Venture. Same profile. At 3:47 a.m., the third tanker, MV Nordic Princess, a 240-meter crude carrier in the westbound lane, transmitted a single mayday on VHF Channel 16 before its radio was cut. The P-8A covering the western approach had it on FLIR within 90 seconds. 6 IRGCN fast craft, 3 already alongside. 3 tankers, 3 simultaneous boarding operations, all within a 14 nautical mile stretch of the Hormuz Strait, executed within a 6-minute window. The IRGCN had rehearsed this operation over 18 months under the designation of Maritime Law Enforcement Exercises. The cover had been explicit and consistent. Iran's interpretation of its continental shelf rights in the Strait required periodic boarding inspections of vessels carrying petroleum products. The international community had rejected this interpretation repeatedly. The IRGCN had rehearsed it anyway. The strategic logic of a three-vessel simultaneous seizure was more sophisticated than it first appeared. A single tanker seizure produced a specific U.S. response calculus: protect the vessel, risk escalation, create a precedent. Two simultaneous seizures complicated the response geometry: which vessel first, how to divide response assets, whether the seizure of the second vessel would be framed as retaliation for the U.S. response to the first. 3 simultaneous seizures in the Strait of Hormuz's traffic separation lanes through which 18% of the world's seaborne oil moved every day, was a different category of problem entirely. 3 vessels held simultaneously created a hostage architecture. Moving against any one of them created risk for the other 2. The IRGCN had assessed that the United States would recognize this architecture and hesitate. In that hesitation, Iranian diplomatic channels would open, a negotiating position would be established, and the seizures would become leverage rather than a confrontation. Their assessment was grounded in reasonable historical precedent. The 2007 Royal Navy seizure incident had produced exactly the outcome the IRGCN wanted. Personnel returned, the UK having made no military response, the incident fading into diplomatic process. The 2019 seizure of the Stena Impero had produced a similar dynamic. The IRGCN had 7 documented precedents of vessel seizures in which the responding party had chosen negotiation over military action. What their assessment did not incorporate was the specific composition of the naval force operating in the Persian Gulf in the 6 weeks following the intelligence elevation that had flagged the simultaneous seizure planning. The USS Bataan Amphibious Ready Group had arrived in the Gulf on a routine deployment 31 days earlier. It carried Marine Expeditionary Unit assets: 4 AV-8B Harrier, 2 aircraft, 6 AH-1Z Viper attack helicopters, 4 CH-53E Super Stallions, and the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit's Maritime Raid Force, a specialized unit that had spent the preceding 14 months rehearsing maritime seizure recovery operations. The Maritime Raid Force had trained specifically on tanker recovery, the vessel geometry, the boarding point options, the hostage crew concentration points, the standard IRGCN crew control protocol. The training had been generated by an INDOPACOM assessment published 16 months earlier that had identified the simultaneous multi-vessel seizure as the IRGCN's most strategically sophisticated option, and the one most likely to generate political paralysis in a response authority that had historically defaulted to negotiation. The assessment's recommendation was direct. The response force and theater needed to be capable of simultaneous recovery operations that would deny the leverage before the leverage could be applied. The Maritime Raid Force's training program had been rebuilt around that recommendation. 14 months of tanker geometry, IRGCN boarding protocols, helicopter approach profiles, and multi-vessel simultaneity planning. The training had cost $11 million in sortie hours and equipment use. It had been completed 9 days before the Bataan ARG departed Norfolk. They had trained for this, not as a general contingency, for this specific scenario, on vessels matching the profile of the 3 tankers now in IRGCN hands. The NAVCENT watch officer who assembled the composite picture at 3:47 a.m. had the Bataan ARG's positioning on his situational awareness screen. The Baton was 43 nautical miles southwest of the westernmost seizure, MV Nordic Princess. At flank speed, she would close that distance in approximately 105 minutes. But the AH-1Zs and AV-8Bs didn't need the Baton to close. They needed it to get them airborne. The authorization for the recovery operation transmitted at 3:51 a.m., 7 minutes after the first tanker seizure was confirmed. The 7-minute timeline reflected the NAVCENT watch officer's alert speed and the pre-delegated authority framework for IRGCN maritime seizures that had been established and reviewed 3 times in the preceding 8 months. The Marines were briefed at 3:52 a.m. They'd been in standby posture since 2 a.m. when the P-8, a first logged anomalous IRGCN small craft movement in the eastern strait. The brief took 4 minutes. The first AH-1Z was airborne at 3:58 a.m. The operational plan was sequenced to address 3 simultaneous boardings without creating hostage leverage between vessels. The answer to the leverage problem was simultaneity. All 3 recovery operations would begin within a 2-minute window of each other, eliminating the IRGCN's ability to use hostages on one vessel to influence the response at another. The sequencing required 3 independent insertion elements, all holding at their respective positions until the 4:17 a.m. initiation window. Element 1, MV Starlight Monarch, 4 AH-1Z attack helicopters assigned to suppress the 9 IRGCN craft on the port side. 2 CH-5-3ES carrying Marine recovery teams from the Baton's Maritime raid force to the vessel's stern helipad. Element 2, MV Caspian Venture. 2 AV-8B Harriers assigned to overwatch and gun suppression. 2 CH-53Es with a second Marine recovery element, plus USS James E. Williams destroyer close-in to 3.2 nautical miles for direct RHIB team insertion. Element 3, MV Nordic Princess remain in AH-1Zs, the third CH-53E element, and USS Gonzalez destroyer close-in to provide naval fire support and RHIB insertion capability if the helicopter approach was compromised. The IRGCN had placed boarding teams, assessed at 12 to 18 personnel per vessel, inside each tanker's superstructure after overcoming the bridge crews. The standard IRGCN seizure protocol placed crew in the accommodation block under armed guard, positioned snipers in the bridge wings, and used the vessel's own GMDSS communications equipment to declare a maritime law enforcement inspection on monitored frequencies. The standard protocol had been documented in 7 previous seizures. It was in the intelligence database. The Marine recovery plans had been built against it. What created friction was the MV Caspian Venture's cargo. 140,000 cubic meters of liquefied natural gas at minus 162 degrees Celsius is the most dangerous cargo in commercial shipping. The standard marine suppression profile for tanker recovery, a H-1Z gun, runs along the vessel's deck to suppress IRGCN personnel, was adapted for crude oil tankers where a deck fire was a serious but containable risk. Against an LNG carrier, a penetrating round that ruptured a cargo containment dome under certain conditions created a risk profile that could not be managed by any response asset within range. The recovery plan for the Caspian Venture was built without gun suppression. The AV-8Bs assigned to Element 2 would fly overwatch and suppress the IRGCN fast craft on the water, away from the cargo domes. But the tanker's deck and superstructure would be treated as a no-fire zone throughout. The Marine element would have to reach the bridge and accommodation block without AH-1Z support on the vessel itself. That constraint meant the Caspian Venture recovery was the hardest element. It was also the one where the IRGCN boarding team had placed 3 personnel with RPG launchers in the bridge wing positions facing aft, visible on P8AFL-IR, which could engage the CH-53E on its descent if the approach was not masked by the vessel's own superstructure. The approach solution. The CH-53E descent on the Caspian Venture would use the LNG carrier's own 32-meter-tall manifold tower as visual masking during the final 80 meters of approach, bringing the helicopter below the RPG launcher's effective elevation before they could acquire it. The approach window was 11 seconds from unmasked exposure to deck contact. The CH-53E crew had rehearsed 11-second approaches 42 times in training. At 4:17 a.m., all 3 elements initiated simultaneously. The AH-1Zs over MV Starlight Monarch engaged the IRGCN fast craft on the water with 20mm cannon at 4:17 a.m. 4 of non-craft were addressed in the first 12 seconds. 3 of the 4 addressed craft lost propulsion and drifted. 1 attempted to accelerate under the Starlight Monarch's stern. The AH-1Z on the southern perimeter engaged it before it reached the tanker's screws. 2 IRGCN personnel on the Starlight Monarch's bridge wing fired AK pattern weapons toward the approaching CH-53E. The rounds were ineffective at the helicopter's approach altitude and angle. The Marine element was on the stern helipad at 4:19 a.m. The Starlight Monarch recovery, 480 crew and navigators aboard the vessel, all concentrated in the accommodation block as the IRGCN protocol required, took 11 minutes from first deck contact. The Marine element secured the bridge at 4:22 a.m. The accommodation block was reached at 4:26 a.m. The remaining IRGCN boarding personnel, 7 of an estimated 12, had retreated to the bridge after the AH-1Z suppression of the deck, were detained at 4:27 a.m. The vessel's crew was under their own command by 4:30 a.m. All crew members accounted for. The Caspian Venture approach executed as planned. The CH-53E used the manifold tower's masking for the final descent. The 11-second exposure window closed without the RPG launchers acquiring the helicopter. The Marine element reached the deck at 4:19 a.m. The 3 IRGCN personnel with RPGs on the bridge wings detected the deck contact and turned from their aft-facing positions, presenting their backs to the Marine element emerging from the helicopter's forward door. The bridge was secured at 4:23 a.m. The LNG carrier's cargo containment domes were intact throughout. Not a single round had been fired at or near the cargo domes. The vessel's chief officer, the senior crew member on the bridge, re-engaged the GMDSS system at 4:24 a.m. and transmitted that the Caspian Venture was under crew control and proceeding normally. At 4:31 a.m., the Caspian Venture's crew reported 2 of their members had sustained injuries during the initial boarding, both assessed as non-critical. They were the only civilian injuries in the operation. The MV Nordic Princess recovery generated the operation's sharpest friction. The USS Gonzalez had closed to 3.4 nautical miles and had its RHIB boarding team in the water at 4:16 a.m., 60 seconds before the 4:17 a.m. activation window. The RHIB team was holding position when 4:17 a.m. arrived and executed its approach simultaneously with the helicopter elements. The approach placed 6 Marines on the tanker's port stern quarter ladder at 4:19 a.m. The IRGCN boarding commander on the Nordic Princess had been monitoring the radio traffic from 4:17 a.m. and recognized what was happening. He transmitted on the vessel's GMDSS at 4:18 a.m. a single message in Persian recorded by NSA collection in real time that translated as, "They are on all 3 ships at once." He then ordered his team to concentrate at the accommodation block entrance and hold the bridge crew as a screen. Concentrating at the accommodation block was the tactically predictable response. The Marine recovery plan had modeled it as the most likely IRGCN reaction to a simultaneous multi-vessel operation. The accommodation block on a 240-meter tanker has 2 access points: a forward corridor from the cargo deck and an aft stairwell from the stern quarter. The Marine element split 3 personnel toward the forward corridor with a negotiator, 3 toward the aft stairwell. The negotiator transmitted in Persian through a portable speaker system brought for exactly this scenario. The IRGCN boarding team, 9 personnel per the P8A count, held for 4 minutes. At 4:31 a.m., the team leader transmitted that they would comply with the extraction. 7 IRGCN personnel emerged from the accommodation block forward entrance with hands visible. 2 more from the aft stairwell. The bridge crew was unharmed. The Nordic Princess recovery was complete at 4:33 a.m. By 4:33 a.m., 52 minutes after the first tanker seizure was confirmed, all 3 vessels were under crew control. All 3 were proceeding on their respective headings. The eastern lane was clear. The commercial suspension of Hormuz traffic had been advisory. NAVCENT had issued an emergency routing advisory at 3:51 a.m., recommending vessels hold position pending the security situation. By 4:34 a.m., NAVCENT transmitted the all clear. Vessels had been holding for 43 minutes. The traffic separation lane resumed normal operations. Of 19 IRGCN personnel detained across 3 vessels, all were in coalition custody by 4:40 a.m. Of the fast craft that had transported them, 14 had been addressed by AH-1Z, or Gonzalez Direct Engagement. 5 had withdrawn toward Iranian territorial waters when the recovery elements initiated, tracked by P-8A FLIR to a point 4.1 nautical miles inside Iranian waters before the surveillance architecture handed off their track. In the Joint Operations Center, the targeting officer who had been awake since 2 a.m. when the anomalous small craft movement first registered closed the preliminary record at 4:42 a.m. The records required proportionality assessment. The IRGCN had boarded 3 commercial vessels and held approximately 320 civilian crew members under armed guard. The U.S. response had recovered all 320 crew members, detained 19 IRGCN personnel, and addressed 14 fast craft. No civilian crew member had been injured in the recovery operations. 2 civilian crew members had been injured during the initial IRGCN boarding. The targeting officer entered the assessment as proportional and closed the record. The preliminary report reached NAVCENT and Washington simultaneously at 4:45 a.m. Time from first confirmed tanker seizure to all 3 vessel crew control, 52 minutes. IRGCN assets employed: 9 Hubei and Blade Runner fast craft against MV Starlight Monarch, 4 craft against MV Caspian Venture, 6 craft against MV Nordic Princess. Total: 19 fast craft, Estimated 56 IRGCN boarding personnel across 3 vessels. Recovery results: MV Starlight Monarch, crew of 48 recovered, vessel under crew control at 4:30 a.m., all crew accounted for. MV Caspian Venture, crew of 31 recovered, vessel under crew control at 4:24 a.m., 2 crew members with non-critical injuries sustained during initial IRGCN boarding. MV Nordic Princess, crew of 39 recovered, vessel under crew control at 4:33 a.m., all crew accounted for. IRGCN personnel detained, 19, spread across 3 recovery operations. IRGCN fast craft addressed, 14. 5 withdrew to Iranian territorial waters. U.S. and coalition assets, no aircraft lost, no surface vessels damaged, no marine personnel incapacitated. 11 rounds of 20mm cannon expended by AH-1Zs against IRGCN fast craft. No rounds expended inside any vessel's cargo or accommodation areas. Personnel losses: U.S. military, 0, coalition naval, 0, civilian crew, 2 non-critical injuries, both Caspian Venture, both from the initial IRGCN boarding prior to U.S. arrival. Strait of Hormuz traffic, commercial advisory suspended at 4:34 a.m. Traffic resumed normal flow. 43-minute commercial disruption. The IRGCN's operational model had assessed simultaneous 3-vessel seizure as the configuration most likely to generate a negotiation posture rather than a military response. The assessment was built on 7 precedents. None of those precedents had involved a maritime raid force with 14 months of tanker recovery training, 3 simultaneous recovery elements, and a 2-minute initiation window designed specifically to remove hostage leverage from the equation. The IRGCN had seized 3 tankers in 6 minutes. The Marine Expeditionary Unit had recovered all 3 in 52 minutes. The Strait of Hormuz was open. 320 civilian crew members were on their respective vessels proceeding to their destinations. 19 IRGCN personnel were in coalition custody. The MV Caspian Venture's LNG cargo domes were intact. 7 previous seizures had produced negotiation. The 8th had produced something the IRGCN's planning model had not assigned significant probability: a simultaneous recovery that removed the leverage before the leverage could function. The 8th was now in the precedent database. On both sides.